For most of our lives, the message about dairy has been pretty simple. But lately, you've probably heard all sorts of conflicting things, and it's created this real dilemma in the dairy aisle. So, is that glass of milk a superfood, or is it something we should be rethinking? Let's break down what the science actually says.
Right? This is the big question. Good or bad? You'd think it would be a simple question, but wow, the answer has gotten surprisingly complicated.
And look, for generations, the answer was super simple. The message was loud and clear. Drink your milk. It's got calcium, it's got vitamin D, it's going to give you strong bones. That was the whole message, right? A cornerstone of a healthy diet, pushed for years to prevent things like osteoporosis.
But what if that whole story isn't so black and white? Lately, some really big scientific studies have started to paint a much more nuanced and sometimes a completely contradictory picture. So what on earth changed?
Well, one of the first big shock waves that really rattled this whole belief came out of Sweden. It was a massive, long-term study that came up with some truly startling results.
So back in 2014, a study gets published in the BMJ. That's the British Medical Journal, a really big deal. And this wasn't some small, short-term thing. Researchers tracked the diets and health of two huge groups of Swedish men and women for up to 2 decades.
And when I say these groups were huge, I am not kidding. We're talking over 100,000 people. That kind of scale gives the findings some serious statistical power. You just can't ignore numbers like that.
And what they found, honestly, it was a bombshell. The study concluded that far from protecting bones, drinking a lot of milk was linked to a higher risk of death in both men and women, and get this, a higher risk of fractures in women. I mean, this is the exact opposite of everything we've ever been told about milk.
If you zoom in on the numbers for women, it gets even more wild. Okay, get this. Women drinking 3 or more glasses of milk a day. They had nearly double the risk of death and a 60% higher risk of a hip fracture compared to women who drank less than 1 glass a day. This wasn't just a small blip. These were huge, dramatic findings.
Okay, so what in the world could be going on here? Well, the researchers had a theory, and it centers on a sugar in milk called D-galactose. See, in animal studies, scientists can actually make animals age faster by giving them doses of this stuff. It causes things like oxidative stress and inflammation. The thinking was, maybe high milk consumption over many years is doing something similar in people.
But, and this is super important, even the scientists who ran this shocking study were like, hold on a minute. They stress that this kind of study shows a link, a correlation, but it doesn't prove that one thing caused the other. They made it really clear that we should be cautious before, throwing out all our milk cartons.
And that caution turned out to be really smart, because buried inside that same Swedish study was another massive clue. A clue that showed that maybe not all dairy is the same. And this is where the plot thickens.
So here's the crazy part. When those same researchers looked at other dairy products, things like yogurt and cheese, the whole story just flipped on its head. These fermented products weren't linked to higher risk, they were actually linked to better outcomes.
So you've got this incredible split, right? On one side you have milk, which in this study was linked to higher risk, and on the other, you've got fermented dairy, like yogurt and cheese, linked to a lower risk. So the answer might not be about dairy, but which dairy?
Okay, so that one study from Sweden was a shocker, but it's still just one study. To get the real big picture, scientists do something called a meta-analysis, where they combine the results from lots of studies. And a huge one from 2021 did just that. It pooled data from 29 studies, and we're talking data from more than 1.6 million people.
And what they found really clears things up. Eating yogurt every day linked to an 11% lower risk of death from any cause. Cheese showed a 5% lower risk of death from cardiovascular disease. And milk, the big bad from the Swedish study? Well, when you pool all the data together, that scary link to higher mortality, it vanished. No significant connection. The fermentation factor was looking more and more real.
But wait, there's another layer here. This big analysis found that it's not just about what kind of dairy you're eating, it's also about how much.
This is where we get into a cool concept called the U-shaped curve. Basically, it means that 0 dairy isn't the best, and a ton of dairy isn't the best either. The sweet spot, the point of lowest risk, is right there in the middle.
So picture it this way. If you have too little, you might be missing out on some good stuff. As you eat a moderate amount, you hit that sweet spot at the bottom of the U. That's the lowest risk. But if you go too far and eat a lot, the risk actually starts to climb back up again.
Okay, so what is that sweet spot? According to this huge analysis, it's somewhere around 250 to 300 grams a day. So what's that look like? Maybe a glass of milk and a small yogurt, something like that.
All right, so we've been on a bit of a journey here, right? From that one shocking study in Sweden all the way to this massive global analysis. What does it all mean for you?
Let's just boil it down to the key takeaways. First off, you can't just talk about dairy as one thing. It's not one size fits all. Second, things like yogurt and cheese, the evidence for their benefits is really solid and consistent across studies. Third, the real effect depends on both the type of dairy and the amount you consume. And finally, when it comes to your total daily intake, moderation seems to be the key.
The biggest takeaway here is that we have to stop asking, is dairy good or bad? The science is screaming that context is everything. What kind are you eating? How much? It all matters. And that leaves us with a much better question to ask. Instead of good or bad, the real question is, what's in your bowl or your glass? Is it milk? Is it yogurt? Because the science now suggests that choice makes a real difference